We're going to start. So Ann Wilson, Kim Schroll, and myself, Connie Nyquist, want to welcome you here today. We do this Fresh Elastic because we really are passionate about Christian education, and we feel you're here for the same reason. So today we're focusing on a particular age group within our congregations, within our communities, and that's basically the 18 to 22-year-olds. So I'm going to ask you to do something. I'm going to ask you to reflect back on when you were 18 to 22. And then I have a question. And the question is, think of 3 things that have been part of today's college students' lives that were not a part of your experience at that age. So what I'd like you to do at your tables is, first of all, make sure you all know each other, where you're from, and kind of why you're here today. And then think about that. And I'm going to give an easy one so you can't grab it. Back when I was in college, if I wanted to call home, I had to make a long distance phone call. Not part of college students' experience today. They can have instant communication with their parents, and it doesn't cost anymore. So share at your table, and we'll take a few minutes to do that, and then we'll share with the other groups. Okay? So I'm going to ask one person at each table to be the spokesperson as to what 3 things they came up with. So let's start back there in the middle.
That's not fair.
We'll start for everybody. Okay, what did you come up with?
Don't look at me. I just got here.
Okay, you're excused.
Well, I was sharing that I have a college-aged child.
Okay.
And she was saying how she got a lot more credits than she absolutely needed to graduate. And there's a lot more pressure on today's students to get in and get out.
Get in and get out, okay.
So much more expensive. Although, I mean, in my circle, I know a lot of people that go back for multiple graduate degrees.
Any other things that you came up with at this table?
Can I throw some notes in there?
Yeah.
Internet,
Internet?
textbooks. I was in nursing, we carried textbooks like that.
Mhm.
The kids, if they get them on DVD, CDs, but no, everything's online.
Yeah.
And I think more parents are involved in their kids' choices now than they were before.
Very good, excellent. Let's go over to this table. What did you come up with?
Well, we also came up with the internet and the cell phones
Money.
and the instant communication, with parents, and the stress of climate change and high expenses for school and so forth.
Okay, and over at this table?
Yeah, we had the internet, cell phones, the whole social media thing, Facebook, Instagram. Most people, more students didn't have cars, so we walked. But now, of course, there's Uber, and lots of students do have cars. Student loans.
It is my great honor and privilege and joy to introduce to you my friend and colleague, Jenny Norris Lane. It was probably about 22 years ago that we met in this very spot. I had recently been called as the Director of Christian Education, and when I walked in the office, Jenny was doing her internship from Austin Seminary there. And through some changes in pastoral leadership and whatever, we found that together we were doing a lot here at St. Philip, and we still laugh about the experiences that we had together, and really had a good time doing fellowship stuff and Christian education stuff, and that's it started, and we've continued our relationship since then. Jenny is a pastor, and so she's been an ordained pastor for about 20 years, I guess now. Degree from Austin Seminary. She is a fabulous preacher. She is a fabulous educator. She is a published author. She leads retreats. She is a mom, and she is a wife. Oh, and 2 dogs, right? Hank and Blitz are her dogs. She has pictures. But we bring her to you today because of her position with the denomination. She's just been named the Executive Director of UKirk Collegiate Ministries. That happened in July of 2019. So here's your quiz, right? She's part of the Office of Christian Formation of the PMA. PMA stands for?
Presbyterian Church.
That's one of them. PYWA? Presbyterian Youth Workers Association. Number 3 is PCCCA.
Camps and conferences.
Presbyterian Church Hymn and Conference Association. POMA.
Older adult.
Ministries Association.
Presbyterian Older Adult Ministries.
They got the letters wrong.
And lastly, it's
Yeah, it's supposed to be OM, that's why we were confused.
POMA. It's not POMA? Yeah, no,
It's
you're right.
Dan's making some changes.
Right. But you heard his 501c3 office, and Jenny is here and leading that and bringing new life to that organization, and she is going to tell us all about what she's doing there and how we can benefit from her services.
While she's switching computers, I would like to know, based on your conversation about what you were doing between the ages of 18 and 22, where were you all living? How did you navigate your journey from youth to young adulthood? How many of you went to college? How many of you stayed at home to go to college? Sort of, right? How many of you completed your college degree within 4, 5, 6 years? Okay. How many of us took longer? Yeah. Did anybody leave college, like have to leave college and then go back to finish a degree? Okay. How many of you navigated that primarily on your own? Right?
Navigate what?
Navigated that transition kind of into college, what you decided to major in, how you like your first job, kind of what you did afterwards, right? Meaning, like, you had your family's support, but they didn't sort of mandate what you did, right? So what do you remember? What are some of your memories from that time in your life, 18 to 22?
Ramen.
Drama? Always. That is one of the things that stay the same.
Did you say drama or ramen?
Ramen
Like
noodle.
ramen noodle?
And ramen. He did say ramen.
Oh, okay.
But drama and ramen, I think, are two things we can all agree on, maybe.
It was fun.
It was fun. What was fun about it?
I had sorority sisters, I had football games to go to, it was a lot of fun.
And, yeah, and so what else? How many of you were a part of a congregation or campus ministry or church family through your time in college? And what about your relationships? Like, did you meet people that you dated during that time? Did you maybe, are you still friends with people from that time of your life? No?
Marriage?
Marriage, right? And I figured we could say dating, you know. How many of you have a story about the person that you thought you were going to marry, but then you didn't? Anyway, no, that's a whole other workshop. And so let me tell you, one, it is so good to be back in this room. Ann and I were laughing about an event that we put on here in this actual very room when we worked together. We had a committee, I know that you all have never had this, that was having trouble working together. And so we held a potluck salad dinner, and all we said to them is bring something for the salad. And she was like, but what if they don't bring lettuce? And I said, well, we will be prepared with at least lettuce. Like, if they don't bring anything, we're all just gonna like eat like rabbits and have lettuce, right? But it was interesting that night because we did have enough. It didn't exactly look like we thought it would, but one of the things that we did that night is we also talked about the gifts they bring and the viewpoints they bring. And it was interesting because we found out, how many of you have ever done the lion, beaver, golden retriever, otter personality assessment, right? We found on that committee there were no beavers, which made then a lot of sense why maybe we were not functioning as well as we could have been. But I was thinking about that recently because I got a call from a pastor that does campus ministry at Purdue, does UKirk at Purdue University, where Training is. And she said, what is a great study to talk about the body of Christ with my college students? And as we were talking, I suggested that she do this because one of the things she said is she wanted them to know that whatever they brought to the table was valuable and was enough. And she asked me the same thing, well, what if somebody doesn't bring lettuce? I was like, well, you gotta provide the lettuce, right? Like that's part of your job as the facilitator, as the caretaker, as the leader, as the pastor. Sometimes you've gotta make sure there's the basics. But collegiate ministry in my years, I started off after St. Philip, was a pastor in San Antonio and did children, youth, young adult, and everything else at the congregation in Christian education. And then I went to Atlanta, was an associate there outside of Atlanta, and then ran a grant from the Lilly Foundation for the PCUSA to help youth and young adults think about ministry as a vocation with what is now the Forum for Theological Education. And then went into campus ministry and was chaplain at Schreiner University, which is a Presbyterian-related college and university in Kerrville, and I was there for 14 years. And then was just called now to be the first executive director of UKirk Collegiate Ministries, which is an organization that seeks to support, encourage, and resource all Presbyterian-related campus ministries, collegiate ministries in the PCUSA and Cumberland Presbyterian Church. Right now we have about 230 registered collegiate ministry. And we use the word collegiate ministry and campus ministry interchangeably because sometimes it takes place on campus, but sometimes it's in a congregation or nearby. So it is a ministry for college students. But the title, and I am really terrible at titles, so my own children remind me of this often, as well as my former students that have continued to come to my house. College, and oftentimes rickety bridge from youth to young adulthood, and how the church can help. So one of the things that is so interesting to me, for those who are Generation X or Boomers or Millennials, our path from youth to young adulthood was kind of like a superhighway. It was paved, it was orderly. It may have actually looked like that, right? A little confusing, but there was a very clear transition of how you get from an 18-year-old to a job and to the other things that bring a, sort of respectable adulthood, right? But now it looks a little bit more like that. The transition from youth to young adulthood, especially for college students, it feels very precarious, even though it's the same pathway often. And it often feels like for many of them that if they were to slip off, that what awaits them is tragedy. So this is way too early, but there is a thing called the mindset list, and I'm going to read you just a few of these. This is really here for you to, if you want this PowerPoint later, to go back and look at this. But so during the college students that entered this year as freshmen, during their whole lifetime, thumb, jump, and USB flash drives have always been present. Floppy disks, They're like, what are they, right? We have always had to take off our shoes to go through security. So the nation's mantra has always been, if you see something, say something. Can you imagine? How many of you remember being in an airport and having a friend meet you at the gate to pick you up? Right? If you see something, say something. The tech big four, right? Apple, Facebook, Amazon, and Google are what to them the big car companies were. Nearly half of their generation is composed of people of color. And I'm gonna keep, face recognition technology has always been used for surveillance. The Patriot Act has always been a part of their life. YouTube, let's just YouTube. My 10-year-old has a YouTube channel, which is terrifying, and he loves it. Only 2/3 of this generation identify as exclusively heterosexual. And this I found fascinating. A Catholic Pope has always visited a mosque, which is telling about how our world is intentionally pluralistic, which I think as educators really invites a different conversation. But also, I wanted to share these statistics, and I have 2 really amazing articles I can send everybody. One is on Vox, actually 3. One's from NPR, and one is something that APSE just posted in the last couple of days. 30% of students reported that they had problems with schoolwork due to mental health issues. 50% of students rated their mental health below average or poor. A mere 7% of parents reported that their students suffer from mental health issues in college. 50%, 7%. 50% have struggled greatly from anxiety and as a result have struggled in school. 80% feel overwhelmed by their responsibilities as a student. And 40% of students fail to seek help. Tim Elmore, with an organization called Growing Leaders, has written a book called Generation Z Unfiltered. And one of the things that we know about this generation is that they are the diagnosed most anxious generation that we know of. And Brian Kuhn, who's a member of Presbyterian Youth Workers Association and is a youth minister in St. Louis, also does work with a suicide prevention organization. And he and I were talking this summer at an event, and I said that I read a statistic from the VA that 48% of veterans who attempted suicide, so they were in the hospital, they had attempted suicide, had not been successful. 48% of them, when asked how long they had considered suicide, said 10 minutes. And I shared that statistic with Brian, and he said, with our young adults, what we know is that suicide seems to be an option on the table all the time. It is not a last resort. It is a present card on the table. In my experience and talking to colleagues of mine in the mental health profession, I think, and I don't have any data to back this up, but what I have seen is that if you deal with anxiety, anxiety is your body's response to danger. Our 2 responses to danger are fight or flight. What I have seen with students and experienced with students in our congregation back in Kerrville is that your flight response makes you often want to disappear, right? I want to get out of this situation. I want to get out of this experience. One of the things and one of the hypotheses that I and some of my colleagues in the mental health profession wonder is if that flight response is also why we see that suicidal ideation seems to be an ever-present option or conversation. And with the fight or flight response, one of the things that the article in APSE said that was so great is that the church's opportunity and parents' opportunity is to say those feelings are real, but they're not ultimately true. And the article from APSE went on to say that when something feels dangerous to our young adults, and I would even say our youth these days, it often is not because it is dangerous. There's not a saber-toothed tiger racing after them. It's because it's meaningful to them. And one of the things that when we talk about ministry to young adults and collegians that we have to think about is that if you are then terrified, if your anxiety rises when something is meaningful to you, one of the church's opportunities with parents and with young adults is to say, okay, you can have the option of discerning whether you step away from that or whether you are then brave and courageous. So it's a different conversation. So this is, I would say, the number one thing dealing with collegians these days is that this is the backdrop that is in all of their minds. Even if it's not their personal experience, it is their friend's experience, it is their Facebook experience, it's their Instagram experience, it's their Snapchat experience, et cetera, et cetera. So Anne showed me this book last night, and I had a different slide, but this is so much better, so I borrowed it because it's clearer that the three ultimate questions that young adults ask are, I'm wondering, who am I? It's a question of identity. The focus is on me. Where do I fit? It is a question of belonging. The focus is on us. And what difference do I make? The focus is on purpose. And it's about the world. Frederick Buechner, I don't know how many of you have heard this quote, says that one's vocation is where your deep joy and the world's deep hunger or pain meet. Right? So what's interesting about this is that you have to know yourself. You have to know what your deep joy is. You have to be able to articulate that. Then you have to sort of know who your tribe is, who your people are. And then you also have to know enough about the world to know how these things are going to intersect. The interesting thing that this book says, and another book called Big Questions, Worthy Dreams by Sharon Dales Parks, and many, many, many other books about this generation, is that what makes this so complicated is that 15 is the new 25, and 25 is the new 15. Now get your head around that. I'm a 15-year-old, so I completely understand what this is, right? But 15 is the new 25, 25 is the new 15. 15-year-olds know so much more, and in many ways are so much more knowledgeable and can be more mature, or have the responsibility put on them to know, right? Right now, my son is in high school, and if he were going to the public school, he would have had to choose for going into his freshman year what he wanted to study in college, so he could go on that focus. Because there is a huge amount of pressure, not only for our collegians, but for our high school students starting about the age of 13 or 14 to know what they want to do. What are you going to do after high school? Who are you going to be? What are your values? And they're like, I don't even know, right? And so so that at the age of 15, our 15-year-olds know, if they watch the news, if they are on social media, they know a lot more about the world. What this does is it lengthens adolescence, right? They know more, but they don't have the emotional maturity, right, to navigate it. But then we have 25-year-olds. The economy is different now. They are navigating complications. What I saw in my own work at Schreiner in the 14 years I was there is that college freshmen that I worked with came in emotionally in many ways like high school juniors, right? And so then the pressure for them to know in college, you don't need to explore, right? You need to know, you need to make choices, don't mess up, right? You gotta get out in 3 or 4 years, go to graduate school, get good grades, you gotta figure out how to pay for it, all this kind of stuff. But marriage is later, home ownership is later, familiar relationships are later. So there's a lengthening of adolescence. But I don't want to leave you just stressed, because I love young adults and college students so much. And in 2010, Eileen Hume, who's now with Azusa Pacific, did a research project at Baylor University about what really set apart the extraordinary college students. What characteristics did they have that helped them navigate this bridge from youth to young adulthood? And she found that they had these 5 characteristics. Hope. So we as Christian educators, this is the business we're in. We're in the hope business. The definition of hope that she used is that tomorrow can be better than today, and I have the ability to make it so. Which is a fairly self-centric, but it also is about agency, right? You have the ability, if you screwed up today, you have the ability to fix it up tomorrow. But what I will also say is that the theology of hope, that we have a God whose yes is bigger than our no. We have a God who works beyond Good Friday into the resurrection and redemption, right? Hope. They also have perseverance. This means that their pathways, there will be roadblocks. Somebody tell me a roadblock that you experienced when you were in college. A roadblock that you had to navigate around or through or over for you to graduate.
I didn't have money for college, and so I had to, and my parents really didn't want me to work while I was in college, so I applied for grants and loans. And so that was a constant. It had to be every semester, hand filled out those applications and submitted them. So for me, it was always, got to get that through before next semester.
Right. And so the interesting thing is your pathway was both academic, emotional, spiritual, social, but it was also this financial pathway that was the same time. It was concurrent. Anybody else have another example of a roadblock? So I went to junior college my first 2 years, and I applied to Texas Tech University. And this was back before email and all of that was popular. I maybe even not existent. And that's really sad. And I called Texas Tech, and they said, your answer will be next week. And I called back a week later, and they said, we don't have your file. We lost it. And I was like, uh-oh, right? And I was like, what do you mean you lost my file? And so then I had to figure out where I was going to go. I happened to get a call from the dean of my junior college that I have a scholarship for you. I was like, okay. So, but being nimble sometimes, right? This class wasn't open, so I took this class. This sorority didn't want me or fraternity, so I went to this one, or I didn't do that, right? Navigating. Curiosity. Asking why. What can this teach me? One of the things that we see in these students is that they really have a fixed mindset, which is this is how the world works. Well, college says, oh, guess what? And so curiosity about how God is bigger than maybe even they thought. How this works, what about, right? Zest. So I love this because there's a soap that you can give out to students. Here's your Zest, right? And it's real strong. But Zest really is about sort of managing your physical energy. They learn how to self-manage. Do they sleep enough? Do they not party too much? Do they, right? How do you care for yourself? How do you manage all of those time management kinds of things, but also your energy? And where do you invest? And this one was really surprising. Compassion. UCLA did a study on higher education with 144,000 college students several years ago. And one of the things that they found is that if students, there are these 9 metrics of what spirituality and religion look like and how do you increase these metrics. And it's a really great book called Cultivating the Spirit, especially if you really love statistics, which I don't, so I just go to the end of each chapter and like read their highlights. But one of the things that was so interesting is that if students gave their own money for a cause or participated in helping another person move in and out of the dorm, if they showed acts of compassion, all of their metrics, not only for increased spiritual and religious engagement, but also their navigation of college, all of the metrics of success in college increased if they gave their money. And part of that, I think, again, I look at these things and I think, what do we do as the body of Christ other than, how many of you could probably, if I said, okay, we're going to divide up and we're going to find a scripture passage for each of these words, how many of you think you could do that? Maybe curiosity would be sort of but I keep thinking of Jesus at the age of 12 in the temple.
Yeah.
With the scribes. What about this? What about this? What about this? And so, just so you know, we do have hope. So what's the church to do? Well, the 3 things I want to offer are preparation, intention, and care. So this is probably going to be a little bit different than maybe you think. First, pre-college conversations and events. You got to till the soil before the seeds can be planted. Rituals marking transition. During college, while away, right, and on breaks, intentionality. Post-college, students and parents and caregivers and families, siblings. And this is a piece that I want to share with you, and I don't know why I didn't put the website on here, but I will give it to you, so everybody write it down. Spiritual, emotional, physical, and financial. Our denomination, the Presbyterian Church USA, has an office called Financial Aid for Service. Our students who come from Presbyterian congregations can apply for scholarships. They have a parent loan in their financial aid for service. So there are options and support because there is a huge amount of financial literacy that has to happen for families. But these scholarships can run their whole time in college, and then if they go on to seminary or something else, it's also there. So exploration and preparation. So at one of my first APSEs ever, I went to a workshop called Career and Calling with Jenny Ward Holderness and Forrest Palmer. No, not Palmer. Yeah, Palmer.
Yeah, of course.
And sorry, I looked at that and I was like, that's really fuzzy. And I will say I have used that curriculum and pieces of that curriculum. I don't even know if it's still published. But many of you know Judy Ferguson. I stole her copy of Career and Calling, have used it in the church, I've used it with freshmen in college courses, and it is written for a youth program to do. So, I want to highlight that for you. So some of the best practices that youth groups are doing around the country is there are visits that youth ministers or educators are inviting families to go on college visits. Let's all go as a youth group, right? Or if your student is going to the U of H to look at the nursing program, you say, please pray for Katie this weekend as she goes on her college visit. There is sort of this acknowledgement that the church is involved in this. Financial aid for service. Ecumenical and interfaith conversations. One of the things we're going to find out in a minute is that the American Academy of Religion has guidelines of how college students should be able to navigate living in a pluralistic world. One of the things that I would say is that we've got to start earlier to normalize that we live in a world in which all God's people are diverse. So if you have a Catholic friend, do you know what that generally looks like, right? So what does this look like if you start this conversation in service projects with other congregations, with visiting a temple or a mosque, or going to a Hindu festival, right? Part of it is saying the church says the world is not scary a place, right? We are Christian, and we have a viewpoint where Jesus says, love God and love your neighbor. So we're going to help you navigate that early, which is going to be important later on. Having conversations, is college the only pathway? There is a crisis in this country, according to Business Insiders, that we don't have enough tradespeople. So what does it mean to help a young person discern what their gifts are and what their talents are? Spiritual gifts inventories, personality tests, interest inventories. At Triennium this summer, my 15-year-old went to a workshop on the Enneagram. As I was telling some of you, he now knows all about that. And that was incredibly helpful to me as a parent, because he and I had a huge fight one night, and I thought I'm gonna pinch his head off. And I'm now being filmed, I remember, so we can just edit that piece out. But I went online because I said teens and Enneagram. I Googled on my phone. And what I read there was incredibly helpful, not only of how I could parent him and help him navigate where he was stuck, but it also then went on to, here are some suggestions for careers you may be interested in. And I was like, storytelling. Have you ever, how many of you have youth programs where there's food? Ever? Right? How many of you have ever been asked to share with a high school student how you got to be in the profession that you are? Right? Okay. What does it mean to have people talk about how they got to where they are and how their faith intersects with their job, right? To sort of infuse it through middle school and high school, and not to say Connie's going to share her call today into Christian ministry, right? That's kind of how we have done it before in the past, right? What is your calling? And and I don't know about you, but the adults in my congregation are like, well, my alarm goes off and I have to go to work every day. You know what I mean? So this is also a good thing for the adults to say, you are an administrator at the hospital. How is your faith connected to that? Because one of the things that we know is that storytelling is one of the most powerful ways that we transmit both faith and hope. In the book that Anne gave me, which is right here, Growing Young, she didn't give it to me. I borrowed it and then brought it today. This is by Fuller Youth Institute, and I will say Fuller has some really interesting resources out about this intersection of faith and kind of the edge of culture. Theologically, they are may or may not be everybody's cup of tea. But what I will say is that their research on youth and young adults is incredibly solid and persuasive. And so one of the things they said is they interviewed 500 seniors in high school and said, what do you wish you would have had more of in youth group, in church? The number one thing was deep conversations. But we all know that the average attention span is 6 seconds for somebody in Generation Z. 6 seconds. So you need to have deep conversations in little bite-sized pieces, like little baby Twix, right? You know, but part of that is tilling the soil. Mission trips, I would say, based on the research, it's mission experiences. Bill Buchanan, if any of you know, just did a webinar through Austin Seminary and their Education Beyond the Walls called Post-Colonial Mission. And it was really good. But what he talks about is how you need to give students experiences, but also give them tools to be able to understand what they have seen and participated in, right? So he invites Bible studies where you read, you read certain passages and you say, okay, who's up and who's down in this passage? And then, especially in the Gospels, where is Jesus, right? So part of it is giving students tools, service projects, the intersection of Bible and life. And then what I put on here is there are a lot of vocational resources on the Forum for Theological Education that you can use in Sunday schools, on retreats, right? Bite-sized pieces, not only for youth, but also for parents. So intention, this is the collegiate part. This is the reason you came, right? What do we do with our college students? Well, just know that there are college students all around you, like the Holy Spirit, right? Or the cloud on your MacBook. There are college students all around you. There are those that your congregation has raised up and sent off, right? But there are also those that are in your midst that you may not think about. So I want you to have both of those lenses on. So remind them that they belong. The picture didn't turn out very well, but I took a picture at a church that I was at that they have a wall that says something like Young Disciples, which is a sort of terrible title, right? Because you're like, what, toddlers, right? But one of the things is they have the name of every college student from their congregation and where they're going to school. That's there in a traffic area, so every time people go from the office to the worship space, they are reminded. But then my own congregation, First Pres in Kerrville, last night the Christian Ed Youth and Young Adult Committee got together, and they're sending care packages of stress balls and USB drives to all of the college students for care packages. One of the things that somebody suggested is that the youth do a video to the college students that say, we love you, and a prayer for them that's on the USB drive. So they put it in, and they have this video of all their people. Right? Remind them that they belong. Ask who is already or still in our midst. There are students that are going to community college in your area. There are students singing, being paid to sing in your choirs, or maybe they're singing in your choir for music credit, right? Sort of do this kind of walk around the church. Maybe there's a grandchild that comes with their grandparent once a month. A friend that comes with a friend. Open your eyes to maybe some people. Everybody says, oh, we don't have any college students that come to my congregation. You may not have many, but the invitation is to say, wait a minute, maybe we have 2 or 3. And maybe there are some conversations that we can intentionally have, especially if they are paid childcare workers, right, during worship. if they're in the choir, if they're part-time, whatever. Reach out via text, social media, care packages, memes, all of that. The number one thing that I think is important is to remember to stalk your college students with their online presence in Christian love, right? Because what you will find is through their posts, I refuse to be on Snapchat because there are certain things that I don't want to know about my kids, right? But Snapchat is actually probably the best place to know what's really going on. And so, but hey, I see you have a test, how'd it go? Oh, you've got this orchestra concert. Oh, this is great. Oh, how did family weekend go? Right? Just the text presence, I think, is the most effective pastoral care with college students. Visit. If you're going to Austin and you have a college student at UT, say, can I buy you a meal? And even if they don't like you, they'll be like, meal? No, that's not true. In my experience, even if they can't meet you, they are somebody remember them. The number one things our college students, being the most anxious generation, one of the things that they also feel hugely is a sense of judgment. I'm not doing this right. So what does it mean to train a group of adults in your congregation in listening and empathy? Not to say, oh, you going to jail and now having that drug charge on your record, that's great, right? It's not, it's about how do you hear and receive knowing that you too maybe have made some bad choices, but God didn't stop and you didn't stop, and we are all still managing. And then I'll say connect with a local UKirk or United Campus Ministry or Presbyterian church in the area. And so I want to show you, we are redoing our UKirk website. But this is going to stay. Find a ministry. Hey, I have somebody going to the U of H. Okay, so you come to Texas. And then you go to United Campus Ministry of Greater Houston. You click there. Oh, look. Texas. Trinity University, Schreiner. All of our Presbyterian colleges and universities, as well as state schools, are on here. And what you will see is that the information, and this is not letting me because now it's not letting me do anything. Anyway, so University of Houston, their website, their email, their phone number, who, if you go down a little bit, who to contact. And so you, so connect your students with, I can't find, no, I can't get back to the screen. I got you. I'm dead. See, I confessed at the beginning, so this should not be surprising that I don't know how to work this. But connect your college students with somebody there. As Keaton and Omar know, I connected somebody coming to Rice. They have maybe texted once, right? And so it is not about a huge return on investment necessarily. It is about making that connection and again, via text, via email, usually text is better, saying, hey, I'm here, do you have coffee, right? Because a lot of our students still don't have cars, somebody mentioned that earlier. And so connecting them with a local ministry is often really important because they need to find a Christian community there. So here is the interesting thing. The American Academy of Religion, and this is really long, and again, you can read this when you all get a copy of the PowerPoint. But one of the things that the American Academy of Religion did because of a grant with the Arthur Running Davis Foundation is said, there are some things about religion that our college students need to know. guess what? We're in the teaching people about religion business. And so I thought it was interesting. We all thought that Christianity would be dead, but it's not. And so here are the guidelines from the AAR. That college students should be able to discern accurate and credible knowledge about diverse religious traditions and expressions. The word being accurate, right? Recognize the internal diversity within religious traditions. Do you have a conversation about the Presbyterian Church USA? Have they been on PYC, Presbyterian Youth Connection Committee? Have they gone to Montreat, right? There's a diversity even within our own family. Understand how religions have shaped and are shaped by the experience and histories of individuals, communities, nations, regions. Interpret how religious expressions make use of cultural symbols and artistic representations of their times and context. So, as we read these things, distinguish confessional or prescriptive statements made by religion from descriptive or analytical statements, right? So, in the media, somebody's always making a statement about something. How do you have a conversation? When I had dinner last night with our two college students that are here in Houston, I was sort of like, what do y'all think about current events, right? And it was really interesting how they responded as people who can now vote, right? How I heard this. So one of our students was going to a campus ministry on campus that I realized was PCA. And he kept saying, this is really weird. They keep saying this isn't in the Bible. And I'm like, where? And they're like, I don't know. And so he kept chatting. He was like, they talk about sin a lot, right? So then we had a conversation about who the PCA is, what their theological understanding is. And he was like, oh, it makes a whole lot of sense. So I'm going to give you a way to do this. This is from the Forum on Theological Education, and 5 cups of coffee. So you can have 5 cups of coffee. How many of you have 5 cups of coffee today? In the last 2 days, okay, right. What I love about this, and again, everybody I think will get this, is the first cup of coffee is the God conversation. The second is the gift conversation. The third is the passion conversation. Just because you have a passion for video games maybe doesn't mean that that is your gift, but, 4, the spiritual growth conversation. And 5, the opportunities conversation. 5 cups of coffee with your collegians, right? You already have the Cliff Notes. Where you just say, I want to know. And the reality is, if you do this during their whole time in college, what you'll find is their answers change. They may not know the answer to some of them their first year. But you've planted a seed, and maybe you can say, you know what, I don't even know the answer to that now, and I'm 100,000 years old, right? Or, I didn't know the answer, but then I started thinking about this. So then there's a storytelling component. But what I love about this is the intentionality of it, but it's also informal. You're not quizzing anybody, you're curious about who they are and what God may be doing in their lives. And the reason that I put this slide after the American Academy of Religion slide is because one of the things that is so jarring to congregations when their collegians come home is they often say, oh my gosh, you're not going to church? Oh my gosh, your roommate is blank? Oh my gosh, you now think you're an atheist? Ah, right? We freak out because we're scared for them. But what these conversations open up is a way to navigate just what their life is. Because in reality, we all as Christians are having to learn how to navigate. Your roommate is vegan and Hindu, and you're Christian, and you're scared to talk to them, right? How can we be curious about one another? How can we show Christ's love? Steve Jobs, in one of the books I was reading, asked his pastor, does God know that I'm going to bend my finger? And the pastor said, yes, God knows everything. And he was a teenager, 13. And then he took out a picture of children starving in Africa and says, does God know about this? And the pastor said, yes, God knows everything. And just didn't explain, didn't give context, didn't ask, didn't say, where's this coming from? Doesn't say, what, does this bother you, right? And one of the things that the book goes on to say is that Steve Jobs then just left church. Because in many ways he was wondering, does God care about my suffering? Does God care about my complicated life? If God knows that my finger's going to do that, what, like really, does God care if my finger does that, right? Because that's a different question. And one of the things that these cups of coffee or informal conversations, it could be tea, or when they're old enough, wine or a pint. What these conversations open up is a way to hear the questions behind the questions. I'm an atheist now. Okay, tell me more about that. I've met Christians at school that I thought, I don't believe like they do. Okay. Right? Or I have joined a fundamentalist group and all of you are wrong and I'm going to be baptized again on Sunday. Do you want to come? That has happened. And then you get to then go, one faith on one baptism, and but having these guidelines is, so as educators, I'm sure some of you are going, well, it's not cups of coffee, it can be this, it can be this, it can be this, right? But remember, online conversations, emails are your friend. Because they may respond in midnight, and you may open up a conversation that then goes on via email for 4 years, and you have 6 emails. But they're 6 really important emails. But I also want to say that part of the ministry for college students is a ministry to parents and families, especially parents. So Frank Shushak Jr., who's a senior associate VP at Virginia Tech, wrote this article that I've referenced right there, that he learned something when his own student went off to college. And he was like, I've been telling parents all these things all these years, and all of a sudden I realized, whoa, I didn't know what I was talking about. And one of the things he said is, just as the transition from high school to college can be daunting for our students, being a middle-aged adult can be similarly challenging. In both cases, the process begins with the hope there is something or someone new for us to do or become, enough that we will risk new and sometimes scary choices. So I commend that article to you. But one of the ways that you can do that is by doing a book study. Or if you send college students off and commission them, that you also then give a gift to their parents, right? And you encourage the parents to do some sort of group together, because it is hard. Janet Hibbs and Anthony Rothstein interestingly met when Janet's son was in need of mental health care while he was in college. And he ended up leaving college for a brief period of time, and Anthony was the medical professional that helped him through that. But it is, how do you raise resilient kids if we know that they are the most anxious generation? One of the things that Tim Elmore says is they also are uniquely called and equipped to lead if they can learn to be courageous. So the story that's so interesting at the very beginning is about a young man who is an English major. And he goes off to college, and he has been the salutatorian of his large public high school, and he thinks he is doing great. He gets his first English paper back, and it is a D. Big red D. He goes to the library. He goes to the third floor of the library. He goes to the edge where he can look out into the atrium, and he considers jumping. Somebody in his French class had committed suicide the month before, just weeks into the semester. And he thought, she was so funny. Why would she do that? And he's hanging onto the edge, and he's like, my life is over. I'm an English major and I got a D. I can't do this. And he gets kind of vertigo and sits down by the stacks, and he begins to think, wait a minute, I got a D on that calculus test when I was in high school, and I went to talk to my teacher, and I ended up getting an A in the class. Okay, I could probably do that. His parents would say this phrase about failing, like it was like Funk Dale, right, or something like that. Like, they would even get the words wrong, like, oh well, you know, Funk Dale again, you know, and because they just said, look, it's about trying, right? It's not the end of the world. And he remembered that. He remembered that his church community back home had sent him a note, and he was remembered, and he was like, wait a minute, I've got people in my corner. And one of the things that they talk about is that it's not that our college students aren't going to get to the point where they're at the edge of the railing. It is if they also then have the capability, emotionally and spiritually, to realize, oh wait, I can navigate this. And so, but how as a parent do you do that? How do you guide them but not overprotect them? How do you engage these conversations but don't direct, right? So, formal conversations on parenting Generation Z. There are a lot of great books. Sharing of articles or websites via text, social media. There's a site that often posts things called Grown and Flown, some of which is good, some of which is not as good, but you know, just saying, hey, for all my friends who have kids in college, read this, right? So they know that they're remembered. Commenting on their students' posts, then going, hey Connie, I saw that that he went to that party. Like, woo, how are you doing, you know? Prayer and pastoral care, an acknowledgement that the parents may face unknown challenges because they're also growing. Thank you, Eric Erickson, as they're navigating their own becoming, especially for those who now are empty nesters. You look at your spouse and you go, who are you and do I like you anymore? No, I don't know, right? So I offer that. So the other thing is then what do you do with students as they return to Houston to get a job and they come back to your congregations and they've graduated and they're here and they are like shell-shocked. I have not been prepared for this real life. There's a book by Erica Wrights, and she realized in her work with college students that transition out of college is incredibly jarring. What I was telling Ann last night is that for my students who were really successful in college, very connected in sororities and fraternities or student government or whatever, especially my male students, they often were more depressed their first year out than they had ever been because their community was gone. They maybe didn't like their first job. If they are in a community where their friends didn't go, who did they hang out with? Their social lives are in upheaval. Maybe they're with their person that they dated in college and realize without the structure, or they're not with the person they were with in college and now they're having to like be on Match.com and all that, right? And so this is a really great resource. The other is to, in Austin, they were having young adult get-togethers, different like happy hours in different places around the city as a Presbyterian. through like Mission Presbyterian Austin. One of the things they found is that they never got any momentum. If it was in South Austin, only the South Austin people came. If it was in North Austin, and then they kind of realized over the year that nobody was really invested. So they started doing a study on immigration once a month at University Presbyterian Church for young adults. There is childcare, but what they found is that young adults would go into the city one night a month for a meaningful conversation. It may not be a Bible study per se, right? But it was sort of creating a different kind of community, because they didn't want the same community that they had when they were youth, but they wanted something meaningful. And so, so this may be a gift as your students graduate college. Not that they ever read anything, but you can maybe tweet it to them like 280 characters at a time. And so I think that part of our call as people who love college students, but really people who are part of the larger body of Christ, is to think the pre, during, and post, but also the different levels of care and engagement. And so one of the things that UKirk does, and then I'm going to open it up for a few questions. One of the things that UKirk does now is we know that the last time that the denomination had a full-time person over ministry and higher education was Bob Turner, and he was there retired in 2007. When Bob was there, they did an assessment of congregations and ministries that were intentionally involved in collegiate ministry. And there were 795 that were, they did a Likert scale that was like kind of medium involved to very involved. When I took over UKirk in July, there has been an interesting twists and turns and navigation of the denomination, but we have 228 intentional college ministries. And part of it is because of money, right? We used to give, this synod used to give thousands of dollars to all of our United Campus ministries and college ministries in the synod, and now we just don't have the money. But the more I think about this as executive director, the more I think, what if there are congregations that say, you're welcome here, right? We may not have a fancy program for you, but we're going to see you, we're going to know you, we're going to caffeinate you, and we're going to care about you. Whether you show up once a semester, or every other week, or maybe you even want to get involved in the youth program or the mission committee. What if we had congregations that said, we care about you, and this is what we do for our collegians that go off? So First Presbyterian Church in Waco is quite a ways from the Baylor University campus, and they have a lot of faculty that go to First Presbyterian. And one of the things that was really interesting is they do have an intentional UKirk group, which is a Presbyterian group that gets together. She said some years we don't have anybody, so we just get together, the adults, it's an associate pastor and another adult from the team. We get together and we just pray for the college students, right? Some years they have those that come and really get involved in the life of their church, right? So they may have 6 or 10 or, and, but it was interesting because she said that part of what was so different for them is they said, we felt like we needed to be faithful to the college students, whether they showed up or not, knowing that that college ministry is very much like youth ministry, right? When you graduate your big group of seniors, you're like, it's a rebuilding year, just like TCU, right? Like, sorry, my husband and I love football, and I went to Baylor, he went to TCU, so let's just say when we go to the game this weekend, I'm really excited that it's a rebuilding year for TCU. But you know that there are going to be those rebuilding years. But what does it mean for a congregation to take the stance? We want to be faithful to them because God is faithful to us. And so I was talking to Dee Dee Carson, who's there, and I said, hey, we're having this UKirk border ministry trip, MLK weekend in 2020. And we are inviting all the college students and campus ministers and whoever wants to come Friday night to meet in Austin. And then we're going to go down to the border, and we're going to be in Brownsville and Matamoros, and we're going to learn about how we as Christians can engage and think about policy. As I was telling Keaton and Omar earlier, we really teach our youth about compassion and mercy ministry, right? If someone is in need, we're the Samaritan that stops and says, how can I help you? One of the things that we as a church haven't had to think about as much in the last 40 years is, what does systemic justice ministry look like? And so UKirk, because of my doctor ministry project and some conversations I was having with Crystal Leedy at University Presbyterian and Texas Impact, we decided that we don't expect the college students to know anything already, but we're going to begin to help them build an infrastructure to begin to have the conversation. So we'll go to Brownsville, and then we'll go and be in the tent city in Matamoros on that Sunday. And then that Monday morning we'll pray, and then we'll all disperse back to our own university settings. And so part of what UKirk is doing is saying, how can we supplement and connect all of the various little things? And Dee Dee said, I may not have any Baylor students, but I have some youth that have gone off to college that I think that's going to be exactly what they need. In Mission Presbyterian, I know Christy Click, who was one of my former students, Christy Click Blankman. She's married now, has a baby. Anyway, Christy Click Blankman and I have been talking about what does it mean to have a collegiate retreat in November for all the college students in Texas to come together, right? What does it mean for us as Presbyterians to say we want to affirm the small, meaningful ministries, and we also then want to encourage these greater connections? And so we ask your prayers and your support as we live into this new calling. Those of you with APSE will know that you all navigated this transition many years ago, and we are grateful because you all have great bylaws. But part of it is about how can we equip people to do the really, really, really meaningful and life-changing work of Jesus Christ. So, now, questions and ideas.
I just have a little comment. There's a young woman who graduated from our church, went to Texas A&M University, and she made a very dear friend there. And her friend's mother recently passed away. And I got a note from her asking, she reached out then to her home church and said, is there something that you all can do for my friend? She came back home because that's where her heart was. And I was very touched by that. And so we're sending a prayer blanket and a note that's been prayed over to the friend as she mourns the loss of her mother. But I thought that is an example of how when you remain connected and show them that you care,
Right.
that they return home. They feel that somebody cares for them there.
Right.
And that's where the first place they reach out to. I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
So I was having breakfast yesterday with a rabbi in town, and he was telling me about what he does with their college ministries. And so he has, I think he said something like 50 or 60 college students that sign up for for care packages at the beginning of the year, and give them their address, stuff like that, and then essentially around the major Jewish holidays sends essentially different swag out to them. So around Thanksgiving he's doing something instead of for Hanukkah, so he's sending out tote bags that are gratitotes. But it's, the idea, he said, is to, they have this stuff with them as they're going around campus, and somebody asks them a question about it, well, what's that? And so then they can have a conversation about whatever that is.
Did he talk about, do they come to services?
So I think this is for their home college students who have now gone off to
Right.
wherever. But his synagogue is right down near Rice, so I'm assuming they also have,
Some that come.
yeah, some go to Rice as well.
And I will say that one of the things that we as Presbyterians, that I did as campus minister, is I looked at what Hillel does at UT and then just like repackage some of their ideas. Because one of the things that is very interesting is to think about how do we capture those names. But one of the things that I thought you were going, but now it makes a lot more sense, that if your congregation is near a campus, you can ask permission, and depending on the student life professionals on campus, that sometimes is easy, sometimes it's not. But if you have a faculty member or a staff member from your congregation that works at that campus, it's a lot easier. That you can table, everybody know what table means? Like you have a table at the student life fair, and you say, hey, do you want care package, right? Because one of the things is that students are often like, I don't know you, are you creepy, are you not, right? But if you're like, I'm gonna give you a $5 Starbucks gift card at midterms, they're like, okay, where do I, right? And I think that one of the things is, it really is evangelism to think about how do we help young adults stay connected and remind them, maybe they're not going to High Holy Day services anywhere, but that doesn't remember that they can't, that doesn't mean that they don't have to have a token to just remember it. Right? And so that's a really great idea. Care package, gratitotes. You can totally steal that.
I told him to let her steal it.
Yeah. Questions?
I guess I have a question, because I'm a graduate of when it was Presbyterian Campus Ministry Association. I have used the map.
Yep.
It is so much better, because we had to go through the beautiful PCUSA.org.
Yep.
So when I moved from Kentucky to here, I immediately was like, I want to be on a campus ministry again. Let me go figure out who that is, and the story goes on there. My question to you is, as the denomination has started to put an emphasis back on this, it seems, which I'm happy to see, what are ways that we can support you at the Presbyterian level and General Assembly and things like that? Because what I've seen is, it seems, I'm just going to be camera off.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I would love to have this conversation if they can.
But what I've seen is, it seems like there's a lot of rah-rah around the flagpole. And oh yeah, we're going to redo campus ministry, or we're going to reinitiate it in the presbytery, not New Covenant, but others. And then 2 or 3 years later, nothing comes of it. And there's no metrics for success back to alumni like me to say, we need your help. We need you to write an overture. We need you to get people back around the flagpole.
Right. So what I will say is, and Ann alluded to it at the beginning, that is different, is that UKirk is now our own separate nonprofit, like APSE. But we are in official relationship with the denomination. What that means is, so that there is an excitement, because as we know at the denominational level, when people in charge of any ministry also are in charge of 20 other ministries, then the intention for that ministry you just don't have the time. So there is an excitement right now at UKirk. And UKirk means University Church. It's just our little branding, right? There's no holiness about it. So we have people like, we're a United Campus Minister. Can we be a UKirk? Yes, you could be a part of the UKirk network, right? So that's what UKirk means. Anyway, So one of the things that we're doing is we are saying now that I'm part-time, and we hope in 3 years that we'll have the funds raised where I can be full-time, and we'll have regional coordinators. And so that's the big dream. But one of the things that we're talking about is, what are those resources and metrics? We have a lot of campus ministries that have advisory boards that are people who have never served on a board in their life. So what does it mean to give training to board presidents, right? How do you help them? We're working with the Presbyterian Foundation to give resources for people, like a fundraising calendar. I got called yesterday by a ministry in St. Cloud, Minnesota that got a grant 2 years ago for interns. But the Presbyterian Church doesn't give that grant anymore. And so we talked about ways that they can raise that $2,500. So part of it is saying that myself, the executive director, but also our board members are, we're in the process of creating a brand new website, but also webinars and resources for people to have, because we know collegiate ministry is hard, because the return on investment is really decades later. Mm-hmm. And I had a student that was Presbyterian grown, came to college, she was Wiccan, self-identified as Wiccan, came to everything we offered and challenged everything that was said, and I was like, yay! And graduated. 3 years later, she sent me a Facebook message that said, Jenny, I'm going to be baptized in the Orthodox Christian Church next week. Will you come? And I was like, what? Like, clearly there had been a lot of journey, right? Yeah. And so we started talking, and she said, I know I argued with you the whole time I was in college, but I appreciated that so much that you never gave up on a conversation. And now she met a fella who's Orthodox Christian, which is, and their young family is now there. And, but that's what's so hard about collegiate ministry right now is that it's not the, you spend $500, you're going to have 50 college students come to worship. So we are also working with, is it Catherine Threadgill that does Vital Congregations? To explore what does Vital Campus Ministry look like? What are the new metrics about discipleship and growth? Many of our collegiate ministries are the only progressive Christian, and when I say progressive Christian, I mean that that they won't try to save you if you come to a Bible study, at least that first time. Right. But many of them are also progressive because they are open and affirming and welcoming of LGBTQ folks. And so one of the things that we also know that there are a lot of college, university campuses that need, like SMU just started a UKirk ministry, and the chaplain, which is a Methodist pastor at SMU, said we don't have any progressive Christian organizations on this campus. And so what does it mean to help Jesse, who is the campus minister there? You asked about presbyteries. I think part of it is to share the models. Mission Presbytery has a campus ministry group that meets quarterly via Zoom. And in those conversations, we're figuring out ways to do things together, but also to give resources. And resources meaning curriculum, but also resources meaning, are there grants at the presbytery level, right? Grace Presbytery has a committee, and interestingly enough, there are 6 churches that have gotten together to start a UKirk ministry at University of Texas, Dallas. SMU started this year because of Preston Hollow Presbyterian Church. So part of what is happening is that different presbyteries are saying, depending on their geography, Presbytery of Cincinnati, they found $90,000 in their budget that had been earmarked for campus ministry about 15 years ago. And nobody knew about it, right? I mean, don't we all wish that that was our, right? Like, oh, darn, we got $90,000, right? But they have University of Cincinnati, which is about the size of Texas A&M. So their presbytery has gotten 5 churches together to support their campus ministry, and they're getting ready to hire somebody. But what their churches have done is one pastor is on the college campus and has a like the pastor's in thing at Starbucks from 2 to 5 every Wednesday. And they post on Instagram. If you go by and say you saw this on Instagram, he'll buy your coffee. Right? And so it's really, he was there anyway. He was actually meeting the people in the choir that they pay to be in their choir and their faculty that are on campus. He just said, I'm going to have an afternoon at the Starbucks on campus. So their presbytery geographically has said, we're going to focus on University of Cincinnati. Grace Presbytery, there are pockets of churches. These 2 churches here, these 5 churches here are pooling money and saying, okay, this person is the resource person that is already paid on staff, but then we're going to hire students as interns. And we're going to have 5 students that work 2 hours a week. And they've done that. So one of the things that UCRC is trying to do is meet, in the next year, we're going to meet with executive presbyters and say, what do you have? What do you need? How can we help assess where the energy is for your presbytery? A lot of it is about resourcing right now. Because, you know, a person to do campus ministry is really expensive. So, but it's also about connecting people. So, did that answer a little bit? Okay, so it is pouring down rain, which happens every time I come to Houston. Is it always raining in Houston?
Just when we meet.
Oh, okay, just when we meet. So I would like to have everybody stand up and gather around. If you're able, if you're not able, we'll come to you. But what I'm going to do, okay, here. We will be an amoeba of prayer. A prayer amoeba. So I'm going to do something that, even though we've all already held hands, I want to invite you to have your left hand up and your right hand down. Okay? Because you are supporting somebody and you're being supported. So you're supporting somebody and you're being supported by somebody. For over a decade at Shriner Campus Ministry, this is how we ended every worship service. And to remind each other that this is who we are as a people of God. And you can hold hands. You don't have to just like place them. You can hold them. And so what I want to do is I want us to have a popcorn prayer as we leave. I want you to say the name of, or the names of people that formed you when you were a young adult. And God is going to hear it all, even though it's going to be a cacophony of voices at the same time. You can speak it aloud or in the silence of your heart. But then I want you to lift up the names of young adults that you know, and maybe even parents you know, that are navigating the college journey. And maybe even pastors you know that are also guiding and accompanying. And so I will open up the cacophony, and then we will close with the Lord's Prayer. And then we're going to say, God bless and be with the person on our left. So you only need to know the person's name on your left. So I will say, God bless and be with Ann. Ann will say, God bless and be with Echo. Okay, so it's not that hard. It's not hard. I know. I will guide us through it. Okay, so let us pray. God, we thank you for this time, for your inspiration. But especially we thank you for the people who have been in our lives and the people who are in our lives now that you have reminded us to care for. Hear the prayers that we speak now aloud and in the silence of our hearts. Sarah Nell, Loretta, Layton, Brady, Mariel,
Dakota, Sarah.
CJ, Margaret, Faye, Amy,
Christian.
God, we give you thanks, not only that we follow our brother and our Savior, Jesus Christ, but also that we are invited to come together, to be strengthened, to be reminded, to be enriched for the journey ahead. We pray all of this in the name of Jesus, who taught us to pray together, saying,
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen.
God bless and be with Anne.